Hi, thanks everyone for joining. This is Preetham, Director of Product Security at SoFi. A bit about SoFi, we like to call ourselves as a AWS of fintech. What that means is we are cloud native, we are digital only, providing a lot of financial services to people, and our goal is to help people get their financial priorities, objectives met in a very sustainable manner. I'm very excited to join here and share our journey, how we look at DSPM, data security, and share our learnings with you guys.
Awesome. So we'll jump right into it. And this is kind of a few talking points that I want to bring up with both of you, Zach and Pritam. When we look at the top of the issues or top of mind for InfoSec security teams, we look at the data sprawl challenge. This is what Sentra is coming to solve in this world of cloud data. And the problems that we keep hearing all the time and we see with SoFi and other companies as well, lack of visibility, so many data handlers and stakeholders within the organization, data is being duplicated, moving around. You know this from your everyday life. And basically, you as a security leaders are trying to keep the pace and not slow down the organization that's always growing. And looking at all of those things together leaves us with an increased risk of potential unauthorized access, compliance violations. And the question is, how do we deal with it? So what we laid out here is kind of three key questions that I think it's good to think about as we dive into a deeper conversation, maybe in 10 minutes. So just to lay out the foundation for the discussion, I'd love to hear what comes to mind when you look at those questions. So the first one being, how are we being proactive when we're trying to reduce the attack surface with data? So trying to understand and detect where the cloud data is and is it protected? What do you think about this one? Like, how do you approach it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a one of the bigger challenges that we at SoFi, but I'd like to say most organizations probably face this is first, understanding where your data is. You pointed out just like data duplication, increased data handlers, having so many engineers handle data, being able to get insight to where that data is, where it's being created and stored is the first step for you to be able to say, now
Right.
I can protect that data. So yeah, it's that visibility, digging in, finding it, even where you might not expect it.
Yeah, and I guess this is super challenging because the word data is very generic, but it's actually hiding in so many different places, different formats and structures. I think speaking from experience, what we do at Sentra is we try to look into places where you wouldn't expect necessarily. So I think this speaks to kind of what you were saying about this. Hopefully, we're able to achieve that and give that visibility to where the data is. Definitely a very fundamental challenge. Now, the next question that you would ask yourself, I assume, is you get all of these insights, you understand risks from different platforms and different components of your infrastructure.
Yeah.
How do you prioritize them?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. And again, I think this is like super unique to every organization because you can't take everything at face value. You have to really understand what your organization's doing, what your organization goals, and most importantly, what's your organization's risk appetite. So being able to take those three things into consideration, as well as what you're ready to tackle as an organization, can help you really prioritize and approach something in a systematic manner that's repeatable and doesn't cause fatigue
Right.
across your engineers.
Right. And I think specifically to this point, like you mentioned, it's very unique to every organization. So what you've been doing, and I'd like to give you some credit here. We're going to talk about this later. So you have a very well-defined framework of policies that are internal to SoFi and to SoFi security. And from what I see, this guides you through the whole prioritization process. Would you agree?
Yeah, definitely. Just adding on, like you have the general categorization of data that the industry recognizes as sensitive. But like you said, having your own internal policies and classifications of data just helps you kind of further align with what is most important.
Cool. Yeah, this sounds really challenging. But from what I see, you guys are doing a great job at this. I'm just gonna keep giving you really great credit throughout this presentation. I apologize for that. So yeah, so we kind of covered the basics of how do you get visibility, how do you prioritize issues, and now the important question is how do you take action? Because like I said, even with prioritization, there's so much work to do, right? You're here spending an hour talking to me. You could be doing a lot of work done instead. It's never over. So
yeah,
how do you create like a process around that?
Sure. I think you got to work first on like a skeleton framework. Like, what's a remediation process? What does that look like for you and your organization? Oftentimes, it probably falls into like, roughly 4 main buckets for most organizations, and that might be like root cause analysis. What's the general remediation? But as you dive down into those, the steps required for you to determine the root cause, the steps required for you to determine how do you have to remediate this for long-term success is going to, again, be unique per organization. And Pratham, I know you probably have your own take on what that looks like at scale.
Yeah, I think scale is definitely very important. Like for us, be able to operate things at scale more effectively, efficiently is super important. And we'll touch upon some of the areas as we go through as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very interesting to hear from your answers that a lot of the processes, they have kind of the default, maybe out of the box procedures, but then you always customize it to your own needs, to your own frameworks and policies. So that could be something to maybe go into deeper when we go and talk about how did you kind of implement DSPM at SoFi, which I think would be very interesting to cover. I think the next part that could be a good foundation setting would be to hear from you, Pritam. What were the main challenges that you looked at when you were going through this journey of DSPM? So we've been working together for over a year now. And these, obviously, a lot of those resonate with you still because those were the main pain points. So can you tell us a little bit about this?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think let's take a step back as we started on this journey. Like why we even started on this journey, right? If we see, we have a lot of different aspects in cybersecurity, like product security, cloud security, application security, and so on. So a lot of different, as you say, areas. But ultimately, it boils down to everything that we do is to protect data, right? Everything is like data security at the end of it. Like that's our crown jewel.
The assets, right?
Yeah, and then we mentioned earlier, like you can't protect something that you don't know. So being able to like get that visibility is core thing. And it's funny, like a lot of these days we keep saying data is new oil, but I also think that data is like water. It like spreads everywhere. It goes into different places that we don't know. Somebody does data copy or different systems. Like it goes like so many microservices. They will take data from one place to other place, and very soon you lose visibility into where all your data is. And one of the things that we started with is to really figure out holistic requirements around not only securing the data but also understanding what are our obligations, what do we need to do reporting, because SoFi being a bank and financial services, we are answerable to a lot of regulatory needs, compliance needs, PCI certifications, and each one has like different kind of needs, right? Example being PCI would be a lot more interested in credit card data. Right. But if you look at frameworks, requirements like GLB or regulatory frameworks or GDPR, like they would be a lot more interested in personal information, like how are we protecting that, right? So being able to understand different types of data and understand what are your obligations to protect. That is super important for us as we scale out. Like that's what we talked about. Like how do you scale it? Because not only understanding where the data is, but what attributes of that would be important for us in
Right.
making it secure is also very important. I think
Yeah.
one of the things is what we felt as we were going on this journey was being able to do the classification uh, is something very important in this thing, and we'll go through some areas what Sentra did help us in those cases.
Right, because just like you started, you said you're giving the task of protecting something that you don't know. That sounds like an impossible task.
Yeah.
So, yeah, absolutely. This sounds like spot on, and I think this is what we're looking at when we're trying to understand use cases and pain points. And I think the next couple of minutes we're gonna try and dive into a little bit deeper and talk about how did we take those pain points, kind of integrated with what Sentra does, or a solution like Sentra does, and how did you guys leverage it within SoFi? So, and I'm gonna talk about this point that you mentioned. So accurate classification of data is really at the foundation of all of this, because you can protect what you don't know, you don't understand the types of data, so you cannot really adhere to any kind of requirement or policy if you don't know exactly what you're dealing with.
Right.
So just to lay out the way that a solution like Sentra works, it's usually three components that are very important in order to leverage and do anything with data. So first, discovery and classification, like we mentioned before, understanding what kind of data I have, which services, where in the cloud is it sitting. On top of this, assessing data risk, detecting issues, whether it's security or compliance violations. And then the last part is the operationalization of the results. How do we integrate it with our security stack and existing workflows? So taking these components and kind of integrating with SoFi, we wanted to discuss three different branches or three different ways that you guys leverage these capabilities. So I'd love to hear just briefly, Zach, from your perspective, what have you been doing? And then we'll go into depth with kind of each one of them.
Yeah, so at a high level, what we've been trying to really do here is take, Sentra and, take the standard deployment. So Sentra, has a very standard deployment. Every organization can really take the same approach to first get it in place. But the next couple steps, as you have alluded to, are now making it unique to your organization. Taking the product and integrating it, leveraging it, configuring it, and ensuring that it's meeting the needs of our organization, which is what we've really been focusing on over the past year. And a lot of our conversations have been focused around, hey, this is what we're trying to do at SoFi. How can Sentra enable us to do this?
Right. So which can you say a word about just these three examples?
Sure. Yeah. So we'll start off with data catalog. Sentra obviously is discovery and classification. The next almost natural step to that is like the creation of a single place to understand and direct you to where all this data actually exists. So being able to do that and also get additional information, metadata around the types of data within these locations, when that data types are changing, when a new data type is added or removed. Internal consumption, this could be really anything. If you think it, Sentra is not just a fancy UI, right? You guys have a very verbose backend API, which has allowed us to start pulling data out of Sentra and correlating with our other internal platforms to paint a larger picture of where our organization is at from a risk perspective. And then lastly, data security, vulnerability management, configuration management, remediation process. So you take the first 2 points and now you can plug it into how you're actually managing your risk within your organization and how you want to resolve it.
Yeah.
I think one thing also I will add into the internal consumption. This is very actually important point. A lot of DSPM work is done by the cyber team, cybersecurity application security team.
Right.
But this is not just a cybersecurity problem, or this can be also very useful holistically looking at different places in your organization. For an example, once we have this data classification information that can be used by privacy teams, that can be used by other engineering teams for deriving a lot of insights. So not only just doing the classification and having that inventory, but how do you plug that into a bigger puzzle in your organization? What other requirements you can satisfy? What other use case you can do? Is also super important, and that's what we've been very happy how this has come along for us. It's like solving too many other use cases as well, in addition to security.
Yeah, absolutely. I really liked seeing with SoFi how your team, the security department, is kind of being enabled to solve all kinds of problems and work with different stakeholders, like you said. So this is, I think, beautiful. And let's dive in a little bit to specific use cases. And I think, Pritam, you mentioned before, and we talked about this, the accurate data classification. Now, when you're trying to combine it with these use cases and different integrations, how do you see this and the criticality of it?
The data classification is actually accurate data classification is foundational, and in the sense that one of the things that I've seen a lot of challenges places in many other places is we want to find out credit card numbers, like, and sometimes tools can just say any 16-digit number is credit card number, and that's not very good. We have tons of 16-digit numbers, maybe internal identifiers, maybe something else, and like we start generating those kind of false alerts, cyber team or even any other team is going to lose interest in the tool because it's not going to be very effective. The other big piece is we also want to make sure that there are no false negatives, in the sense that we are missing something, that there is a sensitive data, and this is a lot complex problem than what other teams can anticipate. One of the, I think one good example where we saw was we when we were starting to do POC, we found out there are places where there are sensitive data embedded into various documents, and even the application teams weren't sometimes aware of that because they just understand, hey, we are accepting a document, it's not sensitive, right? So being able to identify to that deep level what sensitive data may be in some database column or in file storage or whatnot, accurately, is super important, because when that helps you to make sure your visibility is complete, but at the same time doesn't burden you thousands of false alarms, right? You don't really know which one to really look at. So super important. I think this is accurate classification is the foundation of any data security program for organizations.
Right. Yeah, I guess the definition of accurate here is like you said, so it can't be under the threshold because you gotta have the full coverage, but it cannot be over the threshold because you don't want to be fatigued with false positives. So how do you implement the accurate classification? That's the challenge. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about some of the use cases we mentioned and give, I guess, examples of what you guys have been doing. So starting with using the classification to building your data catalog. Zach, maybe you can tell us a little bit about this.
Yeah, definitely. So one of the things to note is, like, across the industry, you have very common and well-recognized data types. You know, you think credit card numbers, social security numbers, phone numbers, addresses, very well known. But every organization, for the most part, is also going to have their own custom data classes. So for instance, Pratam mentioned, like, maybe an internal ID that is used for like a member identifier that, you know, an organization might use internally. Well, being able to create data classes that can detect, hey, here we're storing member identifiers. Here we're storing maybe document identifiers, or we're storing maybe even date, time in a non-standard format. So being able to create custom data classes has been fundamentally super important for increasing the richness of the data catalog.
That is also it's very helpful for us to also weed out false positives. Like, hey, there is maybe a credit card number, but this is our test bin, or this is our test data, and we can exclude some of those things with this thing. So it's like more powerful than just like, hey, having a certain custom regex or things like that.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one really good use case is when you use a certain email address for all of your test accounts.
Right.
Being able to classify not only as an email, but this is a test email that we're using internally, so we can actually decouple that from, like, you know, as we get into custom policies and whatnot.
Right. Yeah. Because of well, you're storing organization stores so much in the cloud infrastructure, and you want to make those distinctions. What is my employee data versus the customer data, as well as test data and real data?
Yeah, absolutely. And
cool. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to hit on the sensitive scoring as well. Again, you know, the industry would recognize, you know, social security number. You know, you're not going to hand that out to just anyone. You're going to think that's highly sensitive.
Right.
But you're also going to have sensitivity scoring on your organization, that what your organization finds to be very important. So being able to also adjust sensitivity of certain data classes, custom data classes, so that you can bring them to the surface and say, hey, here at SoFi, we find, you know, this type of data class highly sensitive, and we want to know when maybe it's stored incorrectly, or we didn't know it was being stored in this data store.
Yeah, I think it even goes beyond. So for you specifically, we worked a lot about what we sometimes call toxic combinations, right? So if it's just
good one,
if it's just one type of sensitive data, well, that's interesting on its own. But when it's found in the same asset or in the same storage, combined with other identifiers of the same person, for example, then it kind of increases the scoring.
Yeah, that is super useful actually. Like sometimes the data combination can become very toxic and very important to protect. Like certain things in itself may not be that problematic. One of the other thing also I remember, passwords. Like we had a lot of success with that, like being able to detect those things and like figure out where things have been not correctly saved or protected. That was something. Being able to write through the sensitivity, bubble that up high, was pretty useful for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this also speaks to the point of prioritization, because those are probably the issues you're going to want to take a look at first.
Right.
Cool. Yeah, this is very interesting, and I think a lot of organizations at some point, one point or another, they're gonna want to maintain this data catalog. And I think, Zach, you gave like a nice view into what are the considerations when building and maintaining this, because obviously classification has to be a part of it, because otherwise you don't really have a way to maintain and manage what are you storing everywhere in your organization.
Yeah.
So thanks for that. I think the next kind of use case or scenario we wanted to talk about is compliance adherence, and the role of the accurate classification inside of this. So we did mention before the distinction between common compliance frameworks and internal ones that you build. So I'd love to hear more about this, and what have you been doing around this?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, kind of naturally, the next step is once you know where all your data is at, and you know the classifications, you know, taking into consideration what compliance requirements, regulatory requirements that your organization has to adhere to. you're able to start mapping your data to those frameworks by building those policies. So, at SoFi being fintech, you think about like PCI. That's, a framework that and a regulatory requirement we really have to follow. Well, now we can map back how we're storing our data. Does it meet the requirements of PCI? And a variety of other regulatory requirements, GDPR, et cetera. We can do the same thing. And then one thing to call out is we talked about environments, lower environments, staging, development, prod. Being able to assign and use policies within different environments so that you're not getting the false positives that Pratham, you were talking about. You know, maybe if it's in development and I know it's all development data, well, I don't want to assign this policy to that data because I know it's just going to create a bunch of false positives. So that's also something to really keep in mind is now that you have the data catalog, when you're creating these policies and you're assigning policies to different data types, how can you use Sentra's capabilities of toxic combinations to filter down and prevent the false positives?
Right. And I guess to take it even one step forward, you would want to use these distinctions in the remediation process because you would have different teams addressing different issues depending on the context, on the environment, and the sensitivity.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's one great example of where, hey, if we find something in production, and we want to get that remediated quicker, we're gonna, this is a higher priority than, hey, we found it in staging. Let's work with our developers to ensure that we update whatever pipelines being used to store that data early on. So definitely from that respect, you can assign priorities differently as well.
Yeah.
One of the very powerful thing which Sentra enabled us with this custom policies, and this lot of credit goes to Zach as well. Like we are responsible for adhering to like tons of different policies and framework which you guys have by default inside the product, but like what we have is internal standards as well, and being able to map that, put that into Sentra, that was very beautiful. And it is not just putting that into Sentra. What is helping us to go scale is also putting that information in the remediation details as well. Like we have exact details about if there is a violation to say, hey, you are violating this internal policy XYZ and this is how you fix it. And this is like very good for people because they don't need to learn something new. They are used to existing policies which we are able to map it. So that is a very powerful way for us to, we don't want our people to start learning new tool and new process and whatnot. That they already know what they're supposed to be doing and then start using that.
I think integrating with the existing routines and workflows that you have is super important. And like you said, a lot of the stakeholders, they don't even have to go on the Sentra UI. They can get the alerts pushed to them wherever they're already used to work. I think it's a great point.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say is we didn't really touch on it here, but it is noted is it also has enabled us, you get organization level view, and it allows you to step down,
drill down,
at each level. So here's what I look like at the organization level. Okay, let me work with, I don't know, engineering team A. What do their data stores look like? Oh, hey, let me select these data stores. Here's what you guys are storing. Oh, you had no clue you were storing addresses. Okay, well, let's look at where those are within the data store, and being able to go down to the table level, to the schema level, as well has been really valuable to really help our engineers understand, here's what we're seeing, here's what you're seeing, but where's the disconnect?
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, there's so many different levels of resolution that you can zoom in and zoom out depending on the use case and what you're trying to do. So yeah, like I said, I think what we should keep doing is make sure that we are implementing the different views according to the way that you would need to consume it. Because that's what matters at the end of the day. And I'm happy to hear you guys saying, like, not just now, but working together, that you're able to produce these different use cases and different views based on, the UI or the API or whatever we deliver. Awesome. So I think one other very cool and important scenario is how do you enhance your data access governance or integrate it with the concept of data classification? This is something that you invested a lot in, and I want to believe that Sentra was very helpful with. Would you share a little bit about what you've been doing there?
Yeah. So take, this graph that we're looking at, without something like a DSPM solution like Sentra, right? You might only get the first three columns, users, roles, and permissions. You might also have databases, but you're not going to understand what type of data is in those databases. So I could be like, hey, Aviv needs access to database A. Well, that's for this engineering team. Yeah, grant him access. And I have no clue that I just gave Aviv access to a bunch of healthcare data.
Right.
Well, now that we have Sentra, one of the things we're able to do is look at that access. It's like, hey, this person, we just granted them access. What did we really grant them access to? Or they're requesting access. What are they really requesting access to? Do they need access to healthcare data? Probably not. So why are they requesting this? So getting those last two columns, data classes and categories, we're really able to look at our access and assess at a deeper level. Okay, this is the data types they're going to have access to. What's the risk of that?
Right.
And for Tom, I don't know if you have any thoughts.
I love this feature and functionality. This is like super useful. I think like not only this one direction, the beautiful thing is that we are able to do it reverse way as well. We want to see that, hey, who all in the organization has access to create that data, and then that's something can help us understand where is the risk, what things are broken, is this some other process broken that is creating this thing. So being able to go from a different lens and answer those questions, it's super nice. I think I'm a big fan of this kind of functionality.
Me too. Yeah. I was gonna say it becomes even stronger when you integrate all the different environments, because then in one platform you would see access to Amazon and Snowflake and databases and everything, and then you break it down either by category of the data or by the user, like you mentioned.
Or the environment as well. That's pretty powerful. Like, okay, yeah, sometimes it makes sense. People will have access in lower environments and whatnot, but different places.
Yeah. So I love seeing this saves time in terms of governance, access reviews, and all of these scenarios. And yeah, I see it, like you said, like a very big pain point with a large environment, trying to understand, am I given access to someone? Do I really know what I'm doing? Super challenging. So very cool to hear, how this is being put in action with your environment. And I see we're coming up on time, so I did want to wrap up soon and give some time for questions. So kind of takeaways that we were discussing based on, not just this session, but like the engagement that we had in the past year and your journey. Maybe put in your own words, like Pritam, I'd love to hear what is your message here.
I think what really made us successful, or like just in general for any organization, this don't think data security is just a cybersecurity project or it's just a cybersecurity problem. Definitely engage a lot of other stakeholders, because this can solve quite a bit of broader use cases, privacy, legal, engineering, like giving everybody access and understanding what your data is, where it is residing, even compliance requirements, etc. So I think to start with early on, engage with broader set of stakeholders, gather requirements. That's what Zach was able to do, like come up with a lot of different set of use cases.
Right.
We classification, starting getting visibility is just the starting point. What do you do with that? Like how do you solve different use cases is going to be super important. And we were able to build that out in terms of what we want to do. So we had an end vision, hey, these are the kind of problems we're going to solve it. And that's what we were able to start with POC, understand which tools are helping us get there, how we are able to improve on the native capabilities, bring our own custom policies and things like that in the tool, and make it a very valuable program for us. I think one thing that we didn't talk through is, as we were going through POC, one of the things that we saw was ease of deployment and installation and scaling up is super important. Like we had to literally drop some of the POCs because it was too hard. Like everybody is constrained for time. You are not gonna get a lot of help for setting up environments and installing agents and configuring exit entry point and routes and whatnot, right? So we've been very lucky, I think, and very impressed with Sentra's ability to deploy very quickly. If we had to go different cloud, it was probably a matter of hours to roll out.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think as we scale out, once we had initial flow figured out and setup done, the scaling out to different cloud providers, different accounts, different entities was extremely simple, and that is very important. I feel that people sometimes don't pay much attention even in POCs. How will you scale out? How easy it will be?
Right.
Very useful for because this is gonna make your program successful. So you can focus more on remediation and other things, not spend time on setting it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll add one thing, that's, you don't really plan for this, but on the implementation part, one thing that I really appreciated was, for instance, when you get a deployment and you're like, oh crap, I forgot to give them a certain permission.
Yeah.
A lot of solutions out there, they'll just not continue to try until you fix that one problem.
Okay.
But what I noticed with Sentra was you guys still got data out of that, and you're able to disconnect, like, hey, we don't have this permission, but we can at least start giving you this data.
Gradual,
which was super nice because there's always something where you forgot to include one permission set, and so again on the implementation side, flexibility was amazing.
Yeah.
Helps you keep going forward.
Yeah.
Exactly. And like you mentioned, so you start with like a small environment, maybe when you test out, but you got to think about how you're going to implement it with the entire organization.
Yeah.
So you want to include your whole AWS organization or GCP, and you also, SoFi has subsidiaries, right? And each one of them you want to introduce and include. So these are things we keep in mind. Thank you for sharing this. I think we'll just take maybe like one or two questions, and then we would need to wrap up. I do have one. Let's start with this. I am concerned with data leaving my production environment. How can Sentra help me understand which data might be leaving it? Cool. Yeah. We kind of discussed this a little bit, the environments segregation.
Yeah.
Want to share like in practice, how would you do it?
Yeah. So I think that's an amazing question. That's a super valid concern. And one very common thing you see is production data ending up in potentially lower environments, which is something, you absolutely don't want. Well, the fact that Sentra has the concept of environments, and this is something that we've created policies here at SoFi for, is the fact that you can say accounts or deployments are in certain environments allows you to say, hey, here's a lower environment policy. If this gets triggered, then, hey, I'm probably looking at production data in a lower environment.
Right.
So that's something we've done here at SoFi is we create certain policies for production, and then we create certain policies for lower environments. And when those lower environments policies get triggered, we know that, okay, we really need to look into this to ensure what we're seeing isn't production data leaving the production environment.
Absolutely. One more interesting one that we can talk about. Are there benefits of DSPM that you have been able to quantify? So that's interesting. Like, how do you define like KPIs, or what are you trying to achieve on the more, with numbers? How do you measure it?
Yeah, that's a super interesting question. And one of the things that we see the ROI on this is multifold. Not only, I think we were talking about how you're protecting the data, where your data is, But think about how much time it's going to take for manually classifying the data. So
Right.
if we had different data stores, different cloud environments, different data lakes and whatnot, it's easily going to take a couple of quarters to go through everything, understand the classification. And once you do that, it's going to be stale next day. So
Yeah.
the automated classification is super important. That is very useful. I mean, you can clearly see the ROI on that. But other aspect as well, like being able to respond to the compliance requirements, where your data is and how you're handling and how it is protected. So that itself is very easy to quantify and justify the ROI on this tool.
Yeah, you were kind of not bragging about it. You kept mentioning like a few, like PCI GDPR, but SoFi is working on many different regulations as a financial services company. So super impressive to see you guys being able to deal with it. And if it's something that you can already use a platform to get it, and you can actually see your scoring with numbers, that then I think that, like you said, saves time, and it's something that you can measure.
Yeah, I think I'm going to add one more that you actually brought up to me is shadow data and the cost of shadow data.
Okay.
Which really turns into from an ROI perspective, if you can identify where you have data
that you don't need,
Yeah,
and you can completely purge that and bring your monthly infrastructure costs down.
right.
That's also not even potentially from only security perspective, but just a dollar perspective. Hey, we have 50 terabytes of data that no one's touched in years. Why are we paying for this data?
Yeah.
And be able to purge that data and bring the cost of that down is also one that was recently brought up that was like, wow, light bulb.
Yeah, we like to call it a security product that pays for itself, but this is like something that comes together most of the time. You save costs, but you also reduce attack surface that is just unnecessary.
Yeah.
So super glad to hear that this has been successful with you as well. I think we are out of time here. We're gonna send like a thank you follow-up email, and feel free to reach out if your question wasn't answered to either one of us, or go on our website. Yeah, so I just want to wrap up and thank you guys again for having me here and working with me for the past year or so. This has been a pleasure. I hope it was interesting for everyone who is listening. Anything you'd like to say to finish?
Super happy to see this coming together. I think it's a culmination of a lot of hard work by Zach and by you guys for last more than a year now. So great to see this thing, and happy to share any other inputs, insights that we have learned together here, so that other people can benefit as well. And happy holidays.
Yeah.
Happy holidays, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.